Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join in conversation with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. Today, I have the great pleasure, and I mean great pleasure, of having someone I've always looked up to and respected for many, many years. I actually studied with him myself one summer. I took lessons while I was at Eastman at a program. His name is John Beck, and many people know him. John, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast in Shaping Your Journey. But before we talk about that, just give us a little hint, or talk about what started it for you in the very, very beginning. What started for you in the drum world and the percussion world?
Okay, I can do that, Aldo. And I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania called Lewisburg. And the only two things that you might know about Lewisburg right now is the fact that there's a penitentiary there called the Eastern Federal Penitentiary. And there's also a university called Bucknell University. Those are the two things in Lewisburg. And when I was around 10, I was inspired by the local fife and drum corps. They played up and down the streets of Lewisburg every now and then. And I sounded the drums sort of interested me. And then the band director at the high school was opening up a program where he needed more players to start a big band, bigger than he had. And so he would come around the neighborhood and ask the various families, is there someone here who could play? And they gave me a clarinet. I looked at that clarinet and I thought, that's not my thing. I wanted to play the drums because the neighbor across the street, actually one of my best friend's fathers, played the drums in the fife and drum corps. And down the street was another gentleman who played the snare drum. He was a house painter. That was his job, to paint houses. But he said he would give me lessons. So I said, great, give me lessons. I took my first lesson was how to hold the drumsticks. The second lesson was how to put a skin head onto a hoop, because his theory was, if your head breaks, even if you know how to play drums, it's no good. You have to have a good head. So I learned how to hold the drumsticks, how to put a skin head onto a flesh hoop. And the third lesson I learned was how to read notes. And that went on for 13 lessons. And then one day he said to me when I had to a lesson, now this is down the street. This is actually 4 houses from where I lived on the same street. But this man was a house painter, so drumming was not his main thing. So he said, John, this is your 13th lesson, and that's it for me. I can't teach you anymore. You'll have to find another teacher. And I said, okay, I'll find another teacher, I hope. My father and I got in the car and we looked around Lewisburg. There were no other teachers in Lewisburg. So we went to Sunbury, Pennsylvania, and we found a sign outside someone's house that said tap dancing lessons and snare drum lessons. I thought, okay,
wow,
let's try this one. So my father and I went in and we made a deal to pay him what he wanted per lesson. And I took 1 or 2 lessons with the man. And somehow there was something inside of me that said, this man is a better tap dancer than he is a snare drummer. And so I told him, I said, look, I can't take any more lessons with you because I have a paper route and it interferes with my taking lessons. So that's the way I got out of that, man. And then we looked around for another gentleman to teach me, and we found a band director in Milton, Pennsylvania, about 4 miles away. And he was not a drummer, but he was a music educator. So he had music education and he knew how to hold the sticks and read rudiments and things like that. So I studied with him for a while, and then it was time for me to go beyond that. And he said, "Well, look, I can't teach you anymore. I think he played trumpet. I just don't remember." And he said, "But I have a friend who was in college with me. His name is Art Harbert, and he is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he has a drum shop." So we got in the car. We drove to Pittsburgh. That's about 200 and some odd miles away from my hometown. So there was no idea in my mind that I'd be taking a lesson every week. That's just a little too far. But we made an arrangement for me to come to Art's drum shop for a week. I would take a week off from school, high school, and I could do this because the band director was also the principal of the school. So, and I said to him, "If you want to have a better drum section, let me go to Pittsburgh and take a week off here, and I'll get you a better drum section." So he said, "That's okay." And I did that for the remainder of my high school period. I also did a lot of drum set playing because, in the 1940s, the big bands were around. There was Gene Krupa, and there was Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Harry James, you name them, all those guys, Benny Goodman. And so I wanted to be a drum set player. But I also realized I had to learn how to play the drums. And I did, I learned how to play the drums. I learned what rudiments were, but I never got to play with Count Basie and those other bands. But that's okay. After high school, my band director said to me, "If you want to be a musician, you should go to the Eastman School of Music." Now, the Eastman School of Music is it's about a 3.5-hour trip from my home in Lewisburg. So I went to that place, and I just lost my concentration there for a minute. I went from the band director telling me go to
Eastman, right?
Eastman School. I said to okay, I went to the Eastman School, took an audition, I was accepted, and then I went for 4 years to the Eastman School. After the Eastman School was over with, 4 years, I then went into the United States Marine Band for 4 years and played in the White House, played for Dwight Eisenhower, and so on. And that was good because we did a lot of touring. Aldo, what it taught me, to playing in the Marine Band for 4 years, doing tours, playing concerts every day, all the stuff that we did. Those tours were really brutal because they were 9-week tours, and there were 7 days a week we played, and there were no days off, and we traveled in Greyhound buses, and there were no bathrooms on Greyhound buses in those days, so we had to be very careful. But it taught me the business of music, because when I would go to Art's drum shop and hang out there all day long, and he'd teach me, and I'd listen, and I'd talk to the guys that would come in. Actually, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich would hang out. That was the thing in those days.
Right.
Drummers would go to the drum shops and hang out and talk. Well, I was part of that. So I learned the business. And then when there's a thing called being in the right place at the right time. And when my 4 years were up, I don't know how much more you want to know beyond this.
No, no, this is great.
I mean, behind this, and that is being in 1935, the first percussionist of the Eastman School of Music graduate was Ali Zinsmeister. And that was in 1935. Ali Zinsmeister then went into the Marine Band, where he and Charlie Owen became buddies, and they did a lot of xylophone, marimba playing. And then they went along, played for their time. 20 years was the enlistment at the time for the Marine Band. And in deep 5, I went into the Marine Band. So my time for getting out of the Marine Band was in 1955, I went into the Marine Band, and then I was out in 1959. And that was the time that Ollie's 20 years were up. So I took Ollie Zinsmeister's place in the Marine Band because he was leaving after his 20 years. And I stayed in the Marine Band long from in those days, I got in the Marine Band. I got back to the Eastman School. It was around 1959, 1960. So Bill Street, the teacher at the Eastman School, was about ready to retire after his 40 years of teaching there. And so I then took his place at the Eastman School. So I happened to be available for these positions that sprung up in my career. Now, I had to audition for these things. They just didn't hand them to me. But fortunately, I had enough skill that I could then take the positions. So from 1959, when I got out of the Marine Band and went back to the Eastman School, I started teaching. I was assistant to Bill Street, and in somewhere around there, 68, something like that. I started taking Bill's place, and I taught from 1959 to 2008. I taught percussion at the Eastman School of Music, and it was for me, it was really a wonderful experience because I was surrounded by the best percussion talent in the world. When they came to the Eastman School to study with me, it was not my idea to change any of them. I just wanted to take their art and perfect it and nurture it into something that would give them a great career. And then 2008 is when I got out of the Eastman School and retired. And then I started teaching the history of percussion as an emeritus professor, because I always wanted to talk about the history of percussion, but it was also something I never had time to do when I was teaching full time. I was also playing timpani in the Rochester Philharmonic, an 8-service week. So in 2003, 43 years, I played timpani with the Rochester Philharmonic. And then I just didn't have time to do the history. But once I retired from the school, and I retired from the orchestra, I had to do this thing. And I was teaching from 2008 until COVID came along.
Right.
When COVID came along, things changed. As an emeritus professor, I was allowed to teach, but when COVID came along, they changed the rules for insurance, for health insurance, and said, if you cannot teach any longer. So I had to stop teaching when COVID came along. But I still go to school. Michael Burrett is now teaching at the Eastman School, and he does a terrific job. And so I go to all the studio classes, and I have a camaraderie with all the students there. I listen to their recitals. I listen to their juries. And so in a sense, I'm on the outside looking in now, but there's enough on me on the inside. I'm still
well, speaking of which, I mean, John, I mean, you were also, besides all of that you mentioned, I mean, you were also on the COSA faculty a number of times in our camps, which was always great to have you there with that, with your experience. And I mean, you've also taught people like Steve Gadd, Leigh Stevens, and Joe Locke, as I know. And Steve Gadd always mentions you, because he started with you very young. I mean, you were teaching him before he was still a kid, right?
Yes, Steve was around 14 years old when I first ran into him. Across the street from the Eastman School of Music was a music store, and there was a teacher there, and he was teaching Steve. And someone said, "You got to go here over here and hear this kid. He's really something." So I
Okay.
went over to the store and heard this kid play, and he was really something, and he still is something. That's it's He's just a great player. Well, what makes Steve so good is that he's a humble person. He plays so well. He plays the music. He's not out to show you how fast he plays. He's out to just play the music because he enjoys that. Well, I said to Steve, "Look, you've got to get out of this music store and come across the street to the Eastman School, and you can be in what they call the preparatory department of the Eastman School of Music."
Hmm.
And I was also teaching there at the time. So he became my teacher around I guess he was age 14, 15, 16. And he and I went all through his high school days uh, playing. He was a hit in Rochester, and he was a great hit no matter where he went because he is such a nice person as well as a tremendous drummer.
Yes,
So
and
that's how I got to know Steve. I still am in touch with Steve because he is from Rochester,
right.
and I knew his parents well. And his actually Steve's first teacher was his uncle, Uncle Ed, Uncle Eddie. I never met Uncle Eddie. I may have met him, but I don't remember him that much. But that was Steve's first teacher, and then he went into the music store, and then he became one of my students. And from then on, Steve, as he said many times, and I think I don't know if I'm quoting him exactly right, but he says, "I learn from others." He learns by listening to others. And he takes what they do and he makes them into his style of playing. And that's what makes Steve so good. He's like
Yeah.
an amoeba. He absorbs things. And that's
Yeah.
why
No,
he's
no,
so
he's amazing. And I mean, I met Steve when he was in New York. And what I used to do, I don't know if you know this, but when I was studying at McGill with Pierre Beluz, I was studying classical percussion, but I was a drum set player. And, I wanted to learn to read and all of that stuff. So all the drum set and everything else that I learned and percussion, like the congas and Cuban percussion and all of that, I was flying to New York every month. I saved all my money and would go to New York, and I was going on a regular basis. And Steve, I mean, I met Steve at a session and we became friends, and at some of the others as well. But Steve would take me around to the studios and just watch the sessions. So that was a huge, huge learning experience, which served me well because when he became such a huge reference point because he was playing on everybody's records, and I got to see what he was doing. That was so different. His whole approach to everything, which was, I mean, as you say, it was, the humility would just floored me, and I said, that's the way to do it. Like, it's about the music, it's about people. You are there to make this thing the best you can, and that was Steve Things, and he was like God in the studios, and it I remember learning so much from just watching him in the studios when I came back to Montreal. And my idea was to move to New York and be a studio musician. But as I progressed in Montreal, I met the guys in repercussion. We became so busy, and I got so busy doing recording and TV shows in Montreal that I never ended up leaving. So it was costing me more money going back and forth and flying back to do the TV shows, the recordings. So I ended up not leaving. But I learned so much from people like Steve, just watching their work ethic, their professionalism, just incredible creativity. And as you said, the humility level was unbelievable. And most of the people in New York of that level were all, the humility. It was never about them. It was always bringing to the table, how could they make something better? And then when I came to Eastman, I did a summer program at Eastman, but it was a jazz program. But while I was there, I came to see you and you gave me some lessons, I remember. And it was really funny because Steve was performing in Rochester during the time that I was there. So with his own group, with Eddie Gomez on bass, I remember. And I went to see the concert, and I went backstage, and Steve said to me, he says, how did it sound? Was that okay? And I'm saying, wow, like Steve Gadd is asking me, who's like a nobody. At this point, I had no experience. He's asking other people what they thought. So, I mean, that's amazing. And he was just doing things that were so original on the drums. He changed the world with his approach in general anyway, and he still is. It's amazing. And I mean, people like yourself who gave him a lot to think about, and putting fuel under their passion, right? I suppose. Yeah, I don't believe in coincidences, John. You said you happened to be at the right place at the right time a couple of times, but I always believe that that's what opportunity is. Being ready, you love what you do, and you show up. If you stay at home and do nothing, you don't go places, you don't do things that need to be done. Things can't happen because nobody sees you, nobody knows what you do. So that's part of the business part that you have to show up. Like you went to those places. Steve went to New York to pursue his his dream, and he did more than a dream. It was complete paradise that he created for everybody to learn from, and we're still learning from his stuff, right? But you're also a composer. I remember you wrote a piece even for Steve Gadd. It was what was that called, John? That piece.
The which piece is it?
The piece there's a piece that you wrote that was for drum set and percussion ensemble that I actually performed with a percussion group back at McGill. But
jazz variants.
I
I also wrote a piece called "In the Pocket." That was for four drum set players. But the piece for percussion ensemble, I think the only one I wrote that has any jazz and big band connotation to it was a thing called Jazz Variants.
Wasn't there one with a drum set and like 7 or 8 percussion players?
Oh yeah, I also wrote a concerto for drum set.
That's the one.
The concerto. Concerto, yes, there was a concerto.
Yes. And we played that with Pierre Beluse, and we had a percussion ensemble at McGill, which had 2 names. It had the contemporary music name, which is the McGill Percussion Ensemble, and also it was also called Concept Neuf, and we did a lot of recordings of more pop music. We even did the Path, which became a big hit, Ralph McDonald's Path, the Path. But we played that a number of times. That was a great piece. You wrote that for Steve or not?
Well,
the concerto.
What I wanted to do was write a piece for jazz called Jazz Variants. Well, first of all, I wrote the timpani piece called Sonata. So that was my first inspiration, a timpani piece. Then I wanted to write a jazz piece. That was Jazz Variants. Then I wanted to write a concerto for drum set. And I did not write that for anyone in particular. I just wanted to write it.
Okay.
It's been played by a lot of people. Louis Belson has been at Eastman. He's played it. And so I just wanted to show that the drum set can be incorporated into a nice piece of music. It doesn't have to be loud and fast, but it can be like the big band era. That's what I grew up in the 40s. So I was born in 1933. So I was really there when the big bands took over. So that's what I wanted to be. I never, ever dreamed I would be a timpanist in an orchestra for 49 or for 43 years.
Wow.
But I practiced. I knew what timpanists need to do. And when the opportunity opened the gates. I jumped in and I got the job, and I would not ever want to change it. I'm very happy for what went on in my career. I played the timpani, but I also played gigs on the weekend many times. The drum set, I used to tell my students, you'd like this. Every student that came in, they'd be playing, and somewhere during the lesson, not every student, but many times, in my studio, there was a drum set in the corner. And we come to maybe to an end of something they were playing. And I said, see that set back there? I said, yeah. I said, don't ever dismiss that as a noisemaker. That can make you more money playing weddings, bar mitzvahs, all kinds of things, jazz jobs and so on. And when the symphony job is not there, you can always play a weekend somewhere. And that's kind of the way I thought. And I always wanted to do the classical and the jazz together. I knew there was, I knew the one simple thing somewhere, I don't know who taught me, but 2/8 notes in the classical world go bup, 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 bup. 2/8 notes in the jazz world go boom, bup, boom, bup, bup. So it's either classical, det, det, or jazz, boo, det, like a triplet.
Right,
and I learned that. And that's pretty much, if that's in your within you, you can have a great career.
Yeah, no, and especially, I mean, learning from great teachers like yourself who talk more about the music. I mean, I teach and I played drums. Like, to me, it's a melodic instrument. I don't differentiate between rhythm and melody. It's just melody that's rhythmic or less rhythmic or more rhythmic. So everything I play has notes in my mind. And when I tell students, when you're playing those cymbals, you're not just hitting a cymbal. There are many notes in that. The relative pitches within it, and the complex or thin, low, high, thick, the different sounds, and they're all melodies. And the more they think about melody, I mean, if you listen to anyone who's done anything of interest, like Steve Gadd, yourself, and many others, they're playing melodies. Yes, there are rhythms, but it's melodies. That's my approach, and you're absolutely right. Those melodies would be either in the duple or the triple, and those are the two systems, right?
Aldo, the drum set is really a chorus. It's alto, or excuse me, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Bum, 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 boom, bum, bum, boom, boom, bum, 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 boom, boom, bum, bum, boom, boom. And once you get that in your mind, you can play melodically, like you were saying, on the drum set and create a melody out of that. And I know drums now, drum sets are huge. How would you like, if you're on a weekend deal, how would you like to carry all that stuff around and play a wedding? No, we don't. You could do that on a snare drum and a bass drum and a hi-hat. But students have to learn that music prevails. Noise just doesn't prevail, not for too long. And so once they get the idea that it's soprano, alto, tenor, bass, da-da-da-boom, da-da-da-boom, that's a melody right there. Da-da-da-boom, da-da-da-boom, ba-doo-doo-da. And that's, there it is, right there in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, and it's, I mean, the melody aspect of it, and as I progressed in my learning situation, I was learning everything from African drumming to Cuban, but it was more, I guess, for me after the classical training I had, and I love playing timpani, by the way. There's some super great players who studied timpani and they played drums, like Harvey Mason. He was an incredible percussionist. He studied at the conservatory in Boston under Vic Firth. And he is so musical. But he's such a great percussionist. I've heard him play percussion, actually, and timpani and chimes and all of that. And you can hear it in his playing. Steve Gadd's the same. In fact, I just remembered something. I picked up a record once with Chuck Mangione playing with the Hamilton Philharmonic. And, I bought the album. I thought, oh, this is cool with the orchestra. And, I always trying to expand my music recognition of things, how people treat different music and blur the lines. I've always tried to blur the lines myself. But I was listening to this, and then I look on the back of the album, and who's playing timpani? Steve Gadd.
Nice.
I said, what? I guess he was a student at Eastman at the time when he was playing with Chuck Mangione, but he played timpani, not drum set on that particular recording. I thought that was interesting. But when I was learning with repercussion, we spent a whole summer. We didn't have time to travel anywhere because we were doing 150 concerts a year or so, besides everything else. We decided to stop one summer and bring master drummers from Africa, Ivory Coast to be precise, to work with us. So we just stopped touring. It was a 3-month in-depth session. And that's where I learned that that's really where it all comes from, that they're all about melody. I mean, we say rhythm, but the Sangere, who was our teacher, insisted so much there was melody. And you're playing these melodies, but they're calls, they're rhythms, of course they're rhythms, but it's all based on melody. And that really refined my own approach, thinking it's always about melody. So every culture has always done that. And the rhythmic, India, of course. Those are all melodies, and they sing them, right? So it's really interesting to hear other people's version of that. And I refined it for my own teaching and my own playing. It's only melody for me. And of course, in rhythm. Otherwise, there's no, a melody without rhythm is just a monotone, right? So
here's something I've thought about my whole life. I played timpani in the symphony orchestra, and I played drum set in a big band. They are both similar, and I'll tell you why. In the symphony orchestra, the timpani, more or less in conjunction with the conductor, of course, can control a lot of sounds. And at the end of a symphony, usually the timpani really gets in there and moves along and plays and keeps things going. And in a big band, and the out chorus, the drum set player can do the same thing by creating excitement. Now, they both have psychologically the same idea. Classical music, jazz. The only difference in classical music, you can't improvise. If you want to lose your job in a symphony orchestra as a timpist, yes, you can improvise, but you won't be there very long behind the tube. And the last thing I did when I retired from the Rochester Philharmonic as timpanist, the Mahler 5 was the last symphony. The conductor I worked for at the time was Christopher Seaman, who was also a timpanist in London. He played in one of the orchestras there, but his main instrument was timpani. Now, at the end of Mahler 5, the timpani part goes bum 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 bum. That's not a solo. But on my last concert, my out, I knew this would be it for me. I laid into that part and played it as a solo. I changed the dynamic from maybe fortissimo to 3 Fs, and I said, this is my out. And I looked up at the conductor, and he knew exactly what I was thinking because he's the tip. And he just smiled and said, "Go ahead." Yes. So that was the way
Nice.
I got out of playing. And what I did uh, in the jazz world, I don't know, I could still play the drum set, but although the drum sets are getting heavier, as I get older, I'm almost 91 years old now.
Wow, 91. Oh my God.
Carrying around a drum set is not my thing, and I don't have any roadies. I can't afford roadies now. So I can still play, but I just don't play. I'm not doing any playing anymore. I can do things like we're doing now, talking about it. But and here's another thing for young players, if any of them are listening to this, and I hope they are, that your ears take a beating as percussionists. No one ever told me to put some kind of control in your ears to stop hurting yourself.
Protection, right?
Although one audiologist said to me, "Well, when a student comes in for a lesson, put the earplugs in." I said, "Well, that's like saying you come for a lesson, I don't want to hear you." So I really couldn't do that. So my ears have taken a beating, so that when I play timpani now and strike the drum, the sounds that I used to hear, the nice boom, 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 now sound like bup, 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 bup. But those are I hear what I'm doing, but the sound isn't that good. It changes. So playing has become non-existent for me at this point in my life. And I think it's smart that any musician, no matter what you play, trumpet, trombone, violin, drums, so on, did not play beyond the point where you're doing your best. Because people will remember, like say, the last thing I did in a symphony orchestra concert wasn't good. They'll remember not all the things that I may have done earlier that were okay. So get out before you become a player who's not doing their best.
Right,
That's
right.
good. If you want someone to remember you as a good player, get out at the right time.
That's interesting you say that. You just reminded me of, you know, Louis Charbonneau, who was the timpanist for
Yes,
the Montreal Symphony for 50 years, right? And one of the great timpanis on the planet. He and Vic Firth, he used to sub for Vic Firth a lot. And I mean, he also had, who was it? Saul Goodman was his teacher. And he taught in Montreal at the Conservatoire. And he was a phenomenal player. And when he retired, he was still playing great, as you said. And that's when he retired. He was like at his top of his game, and he was running the show under Charles Dutoit. At one point, he said, "Well, that's it. I'm really happy about my playing. It's been 50 years. That's a good number for me. I'm moving on." And so, yeah, I mean, your point is well taken. Some people leave too early, but
yes, no, true.
I mean, Bill Bruford stopped playing drums publicly when he was at the top of his game, and he had just, in my opinion, just started really. But he has his, you know, he went on to do a PhD. He had other interests, and I mean, a phenomenal player like that. But I mean, that's interesting. That people would stop at the top of their game. Now, here's a good question, though. How do you know you're at the top of your game? As you're still practicing, you're still moving forward, you're improving, you're performing, you're still in demand, you're still being asked. So that would be a tough one, right? To know exactly when that is.
I guess you could ask. Well, that's a good point. Because Bill Kahn, I think you know the name Bill.
Yes, of course. Yes.
He was one of my students in my first class in 1968 at the Eastman School. And I said to Bill once, many years ago, I said, "Bill, how do you know when it's time to retire?" He said, "It's when you start thinking about it."
Wow.
When you
Okay.
start thinking about retiring, that could be one of the keys to say this is it. Or you could ask someone you respect and say, hey, what did I sound like? Did it sound okay? If they say, well, I'm not so sure. Or you could listen to a recording and make your own decision that you do it, that this was not good. It's time to quit. And
Right.
I think that's important to know when it's time to quit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And sometimes quitting altogether. I mean, I would say I wouldn't use the word quit, but perhaps slowing down the performing part, because I mean, obviously, with the knowledge like someone like yourself has, you still have things to say, things to share with people who have not been on that road for so long and seen so many things. I mean, we had people like yourself and Arnie Lang, who unfortunately we lost, with so much experience. I mean, he was still teaching and talking. In fact, I just had this flash that Arnie Lang, just a couple of years before he passed, he asked me if I would set up a performance of Varèse's ionization in Havana, because that piece was originally um, performed for the first time. It was in New York and in
You know,
Havana.
1933.
Exactly,
New,
exactly.
yeah.
He told me, he says it was 1933. The piece was premiered in New York and in Havana. So he said, I'm going to be teaching this group coming from Ireland, and we're going to perform ionization in New York that following year. He says, "Would you help me arrange? Since I go to Cuba with these workshops that we run for over 20 years now, so I know everyone there, and I have great relationships." And he asked me if I would do that, and I said, "Sure." So when I go to Cuba 7, 8 times a year, so when I went down, I went to their big school there, and I said this would be a perfect group from the university, ISA, Instituto de Percusión Superior de la Percusión. Um, I said, obviously people they know the piece, they knew the piece, but they didn't have the score nor some of the instruments. So with Arnie, I said, okay, we have to get the score. They're missing some of the instruments like the sirens. I remember the sleigh bells or couple of instruments that they were missing. So I made the arrangements to have the score there with Arnie. I brought the instruments over, and then unfortunately we didn't get it all together in time. But that kind of knowledge, folks being around it, maybe you stop performing, but you still inspire because of your knowledge and what you can impart to other people, because now it's meaningful. I mean, you've performed with so many people, you've worked with so many people that experience, it's a treasure to share, right? It doesn't have to be just performing.
Yeah. No, I've learned so much, and I want to thank all my students. I auditioned 1,580 percussionists at the Eastman
Wow.
School. I auditioned them, but I only accepted 248, I believe, because there were only 4 in each class. And over the years, my whole philosophy was, as I said, think at the beginning of this interview with you, I was not out to change players, to change the way they play. All I want to do is show them what I understand, what I think, and play it for them. Let them try it, and if it's something that works into their skill, uh, then they should try it also. But I never believed in cloning. Cloning
Right.
is not something that I ever wanted to do, because each individual has a heart, not only the one that beats and keeps them alive, but a heart for music and other creative things like that. So they must find what is best for them. So what maybe works for me may not work for them, because they are a different personality. Their build is different. And let's face it, drumming is an art where you can learn a lot by watching. because it's so physical. A trumpet player, you can watch your fingers go up and down and listen to what they're doing. But in drum, if they're playing paradiddle, you can see what their hands are doing. So it's important. So cloning to say you must do this, you must do that, has never been part of my desire. In fact, when I tell a student to try something and they try it, and I listen and I think to myself, why did I tell him that? Because it doesn't work. It doesn't sound good. It sounded okay when I did it, but it really didn't sound good. So it's a real skill of learning. You know, I never knew where beating a drum would take me. Back when I was 10 years old, when I first learned how to hold the drumsticks, I never knew where the beating a drum would take me. But along my career, I realized that playing music with others, for others, either in classical or jazz or whatever you're playing, is really a wonderful way to have a career. It's something, you know, how many people are out working day in and day out and hate their job?
Yeah,
They're all,
yeah.
but in music, musicians enjoy their job, or they should enjoy their job. And if they don't enjoy it, they'll soon get out and get into something else.
Sure.
So music is a wonderful way to express life and creativity within you. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up the cloning thing, people copying. I mean, that should only go so far as how do that person does this particular thing, and then you should possess it and take it somewhere else. And until you do that, then you really don't have a voice. So I'm glad you think that way. And I mean, looking at all the students that you've had, I don't think anybody sounds or went in any direction like as the other. I mean, Joe Locke, and Leigh Stevens is certainly not the same mold. Steve Gadd is not the same mold as any of the other. Michael Burritt. I mean, all of those people have their personalities, and you're right. That's super important. And also, I mean,
Yeah.
we're so fortunate to have music in our lives, and it's the universal language. We know that we can go anywhere in the world and sit in and play with anybody. It's right. I mean, I've had the opportunity, and I know you did, going anywhere around the world, and you don't even speak the language to each other, but when you strike a drum or play any percussion instrument, we're speaking, and you don't have to say anything. I've had some really interesting experiences when that happened. I'd be in China watching a concert, and all of a sudden, somebody taps me on the shoulder and pulls me out, and I'm on stage with these people playing, with these percussionists. I've been watching them, and they got me up to play with them, and I had never met them. So, but we're playing, and so we're communicating, and as they're playing something, we speak the same language, so we can have this conversation, right? It's amazing. To me, is incredible, even just thinking about it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the improvisation, I think, comes with improvisation of conversation as well. You said that orchestra musicians now don't improvise, are not allowed to improvise. But I have a question for you. Did in classical music, did they not improvise in the beginning, apart from the solos? A soloist would play with an orchestra, but did the orchestra musicians not improvise at some point in history?
Well, I think they did. I think in the early days, it was probably all improvisation. And then someone started writing notes down, and calligraphy came along, and that became more restrictive for musicians. But I've witnessed in rehearsals, violinists they spend a lot of time in their life in the practice room playing that instrument. That's difficult.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm correct in saying this, but I think to play violin like the great violinists of the world probably took a little more skill than playing a drum set solo. I don't know if that's right for me to say that, but we practice and improvise, particularly in not in classical music so much, but in jazz. And here's what I've experienced in classical music. Maybe this is a new piece someone just wrote yesterday, and in there he has the violin section. The first violinist, they want to improvise. They're supposed to improvise, and a lot of them don't do improvisation. That's not part of their learning. So they want to know, well, which string, when up bow, down bow, and so on. And there's no way demeaning when I say that they don't improvise as well. But I think it's getting more and more into their understanding of music because more composers are asking for improvisation in classical music.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, I had the experience of repercussion in one of our tours in Asia. We were playing in Japan. So I suggested to the guys, I said, let's contact Keiko Abbey. And if she's willing, maybe she could perform with us as a special guest in one number. And of course, the marimba spiritual, right? And she accepted. So we performed this with her. And I remember this was really funny. We had at the rehearsal, we were going through it just to, intros, and I had the part that starts after the marimba opening. I have the part that starts the piece. Dun, 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 dun. So I thought, I'm looking at her and I'm saying, I'm just going to take it a little slower, just because she's getting older now, right? John,
yeah.
that was funny because so I'm saying, I think the piece the way she originally played it was da 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 like this. So I said to myself, I'm just for the rehearsal, I'm going to take it slower just to figure it out. So I'm going da 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 da. She didn't start. She would just look at me and looked at me with a puzzled look, and she'd going. I said, so we all looked at each other and we said, okay. So I brought it up. And then she was just going more, and we were going, oh no, she's going to kill herself. This is way too fast. This is really fast. And then she just started playing. Unbelievable. I mean, she outpaced us. I mean, and then the funny thing was this, John, that we learned all the parts, reading everything as is to the note, and we used to rehearse 40 hours a week besides all the touring we used to. So we were really maniacs in all of these nuances and going way beyond. So we were very, very meticulous. And then she, after the rehearsal, she said, everything is written and you guys play it really well. It sounds great. But when I wrote that, I really wanted people to improvise it. You don't have to play what's there. And that was a revelation for me because I said, when we were dealing with the classical world, we respect what's on the page, we respect what the composer wanted, what the what's being asked. But to improvise was not I think we would improvise in our jazz things, our world music and everything else. We'd have improvisations. But in this, would not cross our minds. So that kind of gave us the freedom. So anytime a composer would write something for us, we'd always ask, any improvisation, or you want it as is? It became the question.
And the older a person is, the better improviser they should be, because all of this music that they've heard, let's say, for 30 years, and now they're going to improvise, that's 30 years worth of music up there that if someone has, you take a beginning student, they can't improvise very well. They don't know their instrument music, so on and so on. But someone older is a good improviser. That's at least that's my opinion.
Yeah. No. Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear it from you, and hearing that in the Mahler you improvised the end, and even if they fired you, it wouldn't matter, right?
Well, no, yeah, in the Mahler, I didn't improvise. I played the part, but I played it louder, like
Okay,
bum, 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 not bum, 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 bum. So I was improvising in a more subtle
right,
way.
right, right. I mean, dynamics and all of that. You changed
Yeah.
for the yes, yes. I understand. Nice. Um, the you were also. I mean, I know you've composed a lot, and you've always been composing and teaching in various places. But apart from all of this, you're also an author. You wrote a book. What was the name of the book? Um, Help me out with that one. I remember seeing a book that you wrote.
Oh, that I wrote?
Yes.
Oh, it's called Percussion Matters.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, there it is.
Percussion
Percussion
matters.
Matters.
Yes.
And, it's a book. It's within the Eastman School of Music. It says Life at the Eastman School of Music. So it's not a book that's out there in bookstores now. In fact, I think it's probably out of print now. But that's what I did write. Something that was another thing that I always wanted to do, just to write a book and teach history of percussion and write a book. I've done that.
Okay. Is that in the same lines as the James Blades book, or
Well, yeah, it is. Oh, James Blade and he's a good friend. I really enjoyed Jimmy Blades. He was here with Evelyn Glennie at the Eastman School, and I got to know both of them. And I've talked with Evelyn about hearing and playing percussion. Uh, she lip reads and she feels the vibrations in the floor. So when she plays, she usually plays in her bare feet
right?
because, yeah, that's how she keeps things going. But Jimmy Blades was in another thing. I don't, at least this is always, I enjoyed this. Jimmy Blades, JB, is the same as
Ah,
John Beck, JB. And Jimmy Blades and I used to talk about this together. Oh, I'm JB from England. And I said, I'm JB from the United States. So, but his book is the closest thing I ever came to that was Encyclopedia of Percussion, which
yeah.
I edited. And it's similar to his book. This Percussion Matters is all about what happened at the Eastman School of Music
Ah,
from the
okay.
1930s up through, well, now it's going on. And what Michael Bird is now doing with the Eastman School of Music percussion department is so appropriate because what most of us back in those days in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so we were learning to play in a symphony orchestra. Well, symphony orchestras are still here, but there are some problems. So percussionists have now become more entrepreneurial in their way of dealing with this. And improvisation, it's just a different world now.
Yes.
Mike is still teaching how to play timpani in Mahler 5, etc. But he's also very good as a marimba player. And he's incorporated both. And I think where he's taking percussion right now is appropriate. It was time for me, like we said many minutes ago, you have to know when to stop. And so I knew that my time wasn't up. That's too final. But I was coming to the end of my career in playing in the symphony orchestra and teaching. Mike is now taking over from what I had done, and he's doing a terrific job.
Yeah, yeah. He's a great player as well. Yes, and
Yeah.
you're also a president of the Percussive Arts Society, as well as being Hall of Fame. Also, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's a past president of the Percussive Arts Society. Yeah, and he's in a hall. I think he's in the Hall of Fame. Yeah,
No, no. I'm
he
speaking
must.
about you. You're Hall. You're. Did you receive the Hall of Fame? Are you in the Hall of
Yes,
Fame? Yes.
I'm
No,
in. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. And you're a past president of Percussive Art Society. Yeah.
President of the Hall of Fame. And in Rochester, they have the uh, Rochester Music Hall of Fame.
Oh,
And I
okay.
am in that along with Steve and his group. And yeah, well, I guess we worked hard, but we enjoyed our working hard.
Yeah.
I never felt like when I go to rehearsal, it wasn't work. It was something pleasurable, something I enjoyed doing. It wasn't on a conveyor belt where I had to put a bottle, screw a top on a bottle, and something. No, but people go through life and they do what either they want to do or what they have to do. So,
Right.
fortunately, I did what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that's the message there is you decide what you want to do and you just do it. And eventually, when you become really good at something, there's going to be demand for someone of your skill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can go on for days, John, and I really appreciate two things. I appreciate, number one, all that you have done for the percussion world. You were a point of reference, not only to me, but to many of us. And I thank you. And I also thank you for taking the time to join in this conversation.
Well,
It's
I
great to
appreciate
have
it.
it.
And actually, put it this way, not what I did for the percussion world, but what the percussion world did for me. Let's leave it like that. What they did for me, they gave me a wonderful life in playing music.
Well said. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah. And as I always say, John, to be continued.
Thank you.